the Toronto Raptors will never be the same, as there was a massive shakeup in the team's ownership, which has serious implications in the franchise, and specifically Masai Ujiri's future. As his biggest champion in the ownership box, Larry Tannenbaum has now lost a ton of power, and Edward Rogers, who is now the main dog in terms of the Raptors ownership group, has already tried to replace Masai Ujiri in the past after he got a bit too expensive following the Raptors winning an NBA championship. So we're going to dive into all the implications that this ownership change is going to have on the Toronto Raptors, what it means for Masai Ujiri's future, and frankly, what we should expect with a Toronto Raptors team being owned specifically by Rogers Communications, as we have a deep track record of Rogers as an ownership group. Obviously it's a company, but Edward Rogers as the chairman, owning the Toronto Blue Jays. So we have a lot of stuff to dive into because, again, there's a lot of Raptors fans that are horrified about this because he doesn't have the greatest track record with how the Toronto Blue Jays have been ran, especially in recent years. So lots of stuff to dive into, but before we do, folks, again, if you're part of the over 50% that haven't hit the subscribe button, make sure you guys hit that sub button so you stay up to date with all of the latest Toronto Raptors news, whether it's on the court or in that owner's box. But before we dive into it, folks, we do have a shocking retirement to announce, which I do want to quickly address, because Adrian Wojnarowski, who obviously is the lead insider out there in the NBA, the main go-to guy, along with Shams Charania, has officially retired, as he announced his retirement yesterday. And basically, I won't read the whole thing verbatim, but he's becoming, an exec out there at St. Bonaventure's College in terms of, managing stuff. And I get it, being I'm not an insider, but even just someone that reports, aggregates more of the stuff, gives opinions. Being an insider must be one of the crazier jobs. We've seen his screen time at times, so wishing the best for Woj, and using this as an excuse to give off the final Woj bomb on the channel. We'll have to switch up this animation to see who actually comes into play, but happy retirement, Woj, from sports broadcasting. Wishing him the best out there for the future. But let's dive into the big, juicy story. The thing that everyone that has Toronto Raptors fans fired up is, frankly, the team has changed forever. As basically, as I discussed in the intro, Rogers has bought out Bell in regards to ownership in MLSE. So if you're not familiar, Rogers owned 35% of MLSE, the company that owns the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Blue Jays, and other sports teams out there in Toronto. So Rogers owned 35%, Bell owned 35%, and then Larry Tannenbaum's ownership group and amongst other sort of, owners, big, rich business people, own the rest of the 30%. Larry Tannenbaum was kind of the face for that sort of ownership group. Well, Rogers Communications just bought out the 35% stakehold in Bell, and this has massive implications in a lot of different areas. The first one, which Michael Grange sort of addressed, which I'm sure Raptors fans don't really care about too much, but essentially from the official release from Rogers buying out Bell's shares, Bell will still have the opportunity to keep existing broadcast rights. For example, 50% of Toronto Raptors games with a reasonable sort of buyout agreement. So essentially, Bell owns TSN, and then Rogers owns Sportsnet. So we have that 50-50 split in regards to Toronto Raptors games. That will still be the case. We'll still get our games on TSN, which I guess does matter because, again, Jack Armstrong is the lead broadcaster for TSN, and then you have Alvin Williams out there for Sportsnet, and again, a lot of us are big fans of Jack Armstrong, not to trash on Alvin Williams by any stretch, but Jack Armstrong has that history, so I guess moving away from TSN, you also miss the Leo Routen's halftime reports, all those types of things, so that split will continue out there into the future, which was the reason Bell and Rogers ended up buying the Toronto Raptors, buying these teams back in the early 2000s, right? They wanted that split, those media rights, so that will continue to happen, but the bigger concern for a lot of Toronto Raptors fans is, frankly, how good will this team be? How good will the squad be under Edward Rogers' sort of ownership group? And there's a lot of things to really dive into regarding this situation. So Eric Karoon gave a really nice breakdown in terms of what's going on, but the news now shifts focus to two men: Rogers chairman Edward Rogers and Raptors president and vice chairman Masai Ujiri. They have had a strained relationship in the past and now progress as undeniably the most powerful person in the company that owns the team. Before Wednesday, it was already a relationship that required monitoring, and now it must be observed intently. When asked for comment on Wednesday by The Athletic, Masai Ujiri declined, expressing no concern about the sale. So, if you're not familiar with what happened, essentially, it stands to reason. So, essentially, that basically, Toronto Raptors president Masai Ujiri, vice chairman, president of basketball operations in the past, Masai Ujiri was seeking a contract extension a couple years ago, and Edward Rogers came out and has publicly noted that he didn't want to give all that money up to Masai Ujiri. Figured Bobby Webster could do just as good of a job as Masai Ujiri, and after the Toronto Raptors won a championship, which is a crazy time. Whatever you think of what Masai Ujiri did over the past 2-3 seasons, at that time in 2021, that was an absurd thought because Masai Ujiri was basically running off of no misses, and essentially, I don't think it was some great insider knowledge that Edward Rogers thought that there'd be some fumbled moves behind Masai Ujiri. Maybe he was, and he's insightful, and I've seen some people making those takes, but really it was a money move, a money play, and Rogers would be able to sort of cheap out in regards to that situation and not have to pay Masai Ujiri, who was one of the more highly regarded sort of people out there in the NBA in regards to ownership rights. Larry Tannenbaum ended up supporting Masai Ujiri. It was a whole thing. It was a big thing. I discussed this in a recent video a week ago when we heard rumblings about the stuff that was going on. People were saying, oh, it's a nothing story. We hear some stuff that's happened. But essentially, Eric Green went on to say that essentially it stands to reason that there will be increased tension. With Bell stepping away, minority owner Larry Tannenbaum, who has been Ujiri's mentor within MLSE and is the chairman of the company, will likely become just another stakeholder rather than someone who holds significant sway because of the two communications giants had equal power. Tannenbaum isn't going anywhere imminently. Last week, he was re-elected as chair of the NBA's Board of Governors, and Ujiri is the Raptors' alternate governor, a symbol that of his relationship out there with Tannenbaum. So, again, we were worried about Larry Tannenbaum sort of getting kicked out, being removed from the team, and all those types of things. And then if Tannenbaum was gone, given the tension between Masai Ujiri as well as Edward Rogers, right? If Tannenbaum leaves, then that tension's going to get amped up. Masai Ujiri doesn't have his big champion out there in the ownership box, but now Tannenbaum's voice is going to be a bit diluted because he doesn't have that ownership stake. It's just more so of a stakeholder, even though he does still hold those big positions, right? The guy that has the money, has the ownership, does have the final say in regards to what's going on. So those worries have escalated, but Larry Tannenbaum isn't going anywhere immediately. But it was reported by Sportsnet, I believe, that essentially Larry Tannenbaum can be bought out by these other stakeholders. It was Bell and Rogers in 2026. And now with Edward Rogers out there, if there is a big conflict, it's more and more likely that he'll try to be the main guy, without any other voices out there in the ownership box for the Toronto Raptors group. And there was there's a post that came out. You could see the date on it, June 21st, 2023. This is from a Twitter account. Again, not a major insider source, but it came out from 2023. And its first prediction was right, that I've heard from at least a few different people about persistent rumors that Edward Rogers, not Rogers Communications, had designs to buy out Bell and TB, so Larry Tannenbaum's group, and become the sports czar of Toronto. So he's already done it with Bell. We'll see what happens, but that could mean that Larry Tannenbaum is essentially out of the running, out of the mix for the Toronto Raptors out there in ownership and stuff. So that means that Masai Ujiri's future is very, very much more in question, given the tension that has gone on. And essentially, while they all speak publicly, Masai Ujiri has no concerns about, ownership and these types of things. Essentially, there was tension that arose just this summer as news came out from the Toronto Star that sources said that were granted anonymity in order to speak freely on the matter, say that the tense relationship between the MLSE board member Edward Rogers and Raptors vice chair Masai Ujiri was a factor in the decision to drop the bid for a WNBA team. They also cite Rogers' ascension in his family business and telecommunications, and he's a part owner of MLSE. Now, the controlling owner of MLSE, this was a report that came out long ago when Larry Tannenbaum ended up going in the direction of forgetting MLSE, using his own sort of ownership group and buying a WNBA team. Essentially, the ownership tension between Masai Ujiri, who's an MLSE kind of guy, has some stake into there, and Rogers Communications. So Edward Rogers, there was tension brewing during the WNBA debacle, and then Larry Tannenbaum just broke away from Rogers and bought a team himself. So there is still tension. It's not something that was water under the bridge, years ago once that contract was given out. So Masai Ujiri still has that tension with Edward Rogers, which again indicates that the future is very much in question. Now, what does this mean for the team? Because Rogers came out, or Tony Staffari, I apologize on the pronunciation there, but essentially he came out and tried to put to bed some of the worries about the Rogers ownership group. So he's the CEO of Rogers, while Edward Rogers, the chairman. So two big executives out there in Rogers. He said, "We realize it's about winning. What fans want and what we want is winning teams and championships. We are really passionate about bringing championships to Canada, and in the case of MLSE, bringing championships to Toronto. We take our role as owners seriously, and we know that we have the responsibility to step up and make the investments at the right time. The fans can count on us as owners to continue to increase investments and make sure the teams have what they need to win." So essentially, they're publicly stating that they're going to put their money where their mouth is and be that proper ownership group. And even with the tensions, even with the stuff, even with Edward Rogers seemingly cheaping out on wanting to give Masai Ujiri's contract a couple years ago, they're coming out and saying that they're going to be willing to spend the big bucks on this Toronto Raptors team, obviously the Toronto Maple Leafs as well, if, it can win them championships. Now, obviously, it's a right thing to say. It's an easy thing to say. It's a tougher thing to do. And Edward Rogers, I'm willing to give him this chance. I don't want to come out here and immediately bash him because we don't know. We haven't seen a track record of him as that primary owner, and he said the right things there to start. So I don't want to immediately just completely bag on the guy. Maybe him as that sort of lead voice will be willing to put his money where his mouth is, where he could take more of a reputational hit if he's fumbling all three franchises out there in Toronto. And I do want to give credit where credit's due. Even though the Toronto Blue Jays, they're definitely underperforming this season. They definitely underperformed certain stretches. They didn't get guys like Juan Soto. If you're not familiar with the Toronto Blue Jays, check out Jays Digest. They do great deep dives and details in regards to what's going on there. But he was willing to fork out a ton of money for Shohei Ohtani last year. And again, that return on investment would have been massive. Giant Japanese markets and stuff, but Shohei Ohtani is like the LeBron James, the Michael Jordan of the MLB right now. So, the Toronto Blue Jays were in the mix to get him, and apparently they were willing to give him like an $800 million contract. So when the players are right, Rogers is at least willing to fork over the money there. They did with the Toronto Blue Jays, but again, other moves, other concerns, tight relationships with their top guys like Mark Shapiro has. There's been a lot of discussions about whether or not it's been the right move or not, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with Edward Rogers. I don't want to come out here and immediately peg this as the end of the Toronto Raptors or anything, but everything has certainly changed. It'll never be the same, right? It's going to be Edward Rogers town. No relationship to me. Maybe I could come out there and, Digest Media gets big enough. We'll be able to own this team. Come back to this in 30 years, but, we'll see how it all shakes out. But let me know what you guys think about this major change for the Toronto Raptors. You guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.